Namaste. Now we are in the key module on exemptions from Disclosure of Information under the Right to Information Act. This is the most complex part for application and to appreciate on the part of Public Information Officer. So we'll try to make it simple through discussion on these exemptions. So we will start with the Constitution of India. Supreme Court, we have already discussed in the first module that consistently recognize that Article 19(1)(a), which guarantees freedom of expression, also includes freedom of information. Though Constitution doesn't explicitly guarantees this right to information, Supreme Court recognized in many landmark cases as such. But there are some restrictions even on this fundamental right to freedom of expression. So these are called reasonable restrictions listed out under Article 92 of the Constitution of India. What are they? So obviously, sovereignty and integrity of India, security and relations with foreign states, public order, and contempt of court or incitement of offense. So obviously, all these reasonable restrictions you can find under the list of exemptions under Section 8(1). And we discussed in the second module also about the preamble requirements or expectations of the preamble. Preamble says RTA is required because transparency and accountability are the basic requirements of an informed democracy and informed citizenry. But it also says in actual practice, this implementation of this transparency law may actually conflict with other public interest. So what are those other public interest, and how do you take care of these public interest? So other public interest as per the preamble of the act are these: efficient operations and limited fiscal resources and preservation of sensitive information. And the preamble says the law needs to harmonize these conflicting interests. So exemptions under Section 8 and 9 take care of this particular concern, that is to harmonize these conflicting interests. But now we have other rights also. For example, right to privacy. Supreme Court in Justice case Puttaswamy judgment in 2017 recognized right to privacy as a fundamental right. Sometimes these rights may conflict with each other, and the act needs to balance both these conflicting interests. So that's why exemptions play an important role in balancing all these rights. So coming back to Right to Information Act, Section 3 says, subject to the provisions of this Act, all citizens shall have the right to information. What does it mean? It means the RTA is not an absolute right. It is a qualified right, qualified by certain provisions. But what are those provisions? So you can find these provisions subject to which all citizens can enjoy right to information under three particular sections, that is Section 8, Section 9 and Section 24. So we will start with the Section 24. So these again can be categorized into two categories of provisions which have some bearing on the right to information. So we'll start with the Section 24. So these Section 24 partially excludes certain organizations, certain authorities from the ambit of Right to Information Act. These are all called exclusions. So you can find a list under second schedule, where we have now 25 organizations, including the Central Bureau of Investigation, which are partially excluded from the purview of the Right to Information Act. So we will have a look at the list at the end of the presentation, or you can refer to the material given through the reference material section, where you can find a list of 25 organizations which are excluded from the purview of the Right to Information Act. But these are not completely fully excluded. They are partially excluded. What does it mean? It means if there is any information relates to allegations of corruption, allegations of human rights violation, then the public authority is supposed to provide that information, disclose that information. And these public authorities, these are organizations listed under second schedule, are supposed to designate public information officers and first update authorities also, as done by other public authorities, because they have to receive applications from citizens, and they have to seek approval of the Central Information Commission if they are central authorities, or State Information Commission if they are state authorities. And the maximum timeline for seeking approval is 45 days in this case. So only after approval by the Information Commission, the concerned Information Commission, the public authorities can provide information in this regard. So routinely, they need not disclose information unless it is related to corruption, allegations of corruptions, or allegations of human rights violations. So we will move on to exemptions now. So there are again two categories of exemptions. So exclusions are these bodies excluded from the purview of the RT Act under Section 24 and Second Schedule read together. Exemptions means various situations, various categories of information where public authority can withhold information. Again, these can be divided into two categories. That is, one is absolute exemptions and another is qualified exemptions. These are listed out under Section 8 and Section 9. So Section 9 is an exemption, that is an absolute exemption. And Section 8, subsection 1, there are 10 clauses, clause A to J. These 10 clauses can be called as qualified exemptions. So what is the difference between absolute and qualified? Let us have a look at this. Section 9, where a public authority can reject information when disclosure violates any personal copyright, that is an absolute exemption, because here the public authority or the PIO is not required to do any public interest test. So once they say no, that is final. There is no need to review the decision with regard to applicability of public interest. So that's why this is called absolute exemption. But most of the exemptions, remaining exemptions, are found under Section 8 and subsection 1. These are all called qualified exemptions because they are not absolute exemption. What does it mean? If the PIO thinks that the information falls under the exemptions under Section 8, she has to do one test under Section 8.2. What is that? That is called public interest weighing test. Here, the PIO has to consider what are the factors in favor of public interest and what in disclosure, and what are the factors in favor of public interest in disclosure. So this is called public interest weighing test. After weighing both these factors, as a PIO can conclude that a requested information, if the public interest is larger, more public interest in disclosure, then she may disclose. If the PIO is of the opinion that if public interest in withholding is larger, then she can withhold information. Sometimes they can go for partial disclosure when they feel that there is some need to balance both these factors. So this is somewhat complex part of decision making under the Right to Information Act, that is public interest disclosure. So we can say they are discretionary exemptions. And there are one more classification of these exemptions according to their lifetime. Some exemptions are permanent, that is perpetual exemptions, and some exemptions are time limited exemptions. So what are they? So here you can find that list. These three exemptions, Clause A, Clause C, Clause I, they are the perpetual exemptions. That means there is no time limit on these exemptions. But remaining exemptions B, D, E, F, G, H, and J, these are time limited exemptions. What does it mean? According to Section 8.3, these exemptions should expire after 20 years. Like, what does it mean? If the record is more than 20 years old, the PIO cannot apply those exemptions called time limited exemptions. PIO can only apply these three exemptions A, C, I if the record is more than 20 years old. So that is the meaning of Section 8.3. That is the purpose of Section 8.3. And as we have already discussed in another other earlier module, that when the PIO rejects a request under Section 7.8, she is supposed to provide a speaking order. So in that speaking order, the PIO is supposed to provide the reasons for denying the request. So when the reason is selected from Section 8, which are qualified exemptions, where a public interest rider is applicable, then the PIO is expected to draft a speaking order listing out the factors favoring public interest in disclosure and factors favoring public interest in disclosure. Then why PIO thinks disclosure is required in case public interest is larger than um, the public interest factors in non-disclosure, and or other way around. So the PIO has to list out the factors in favor of disclosure and factors in favor of non-disclosure, and finally uh, uh, write down his or her decision with regard to disclosability of information. And Section 7.9 is not an exemption. Section 7.9 offers some flexibility with regard to format of disclosure. So there are two conditions to be met here. When disclosure would disproportionately divert the resources, or it is detrimental to the safety or preservation of the record in question, then the PIO can change the format of disclosure. So here, PIO cannot reject a request under Section 7.9. PIO can only change the format. Let us say, I will give an example. Let us say there are 20 files having large number of pages. Sometimes the requester wants that all that in soft copy format, electronic format. So here, according to section 2J, the requester can seek information in the format of their choice. But when it comes to disclosure, if they are available, they are held in electronic form, then fine, the PIO can provide the information. But in some cases, they are not available. But in such cases, the PIO or the public authority has to spend some resources. So if it falls under the ambit of Section 7.9, where it does disproportionately divert their resources, then they can uh, advise the applicant to to receive information, accept information in different format. Here they are changing the format. They may send photocopies of that information. Another example where large number of files and true copies, photocopies are sought, where it is very difficult unless you spend a lot of resources to provide photocopies, then the public authority can offer inspection of records instead of providing photocopies. So in this way, we can change the format of disclosure if it meets these two conditions. Now we will have a look at the list of exemptions which you can find under section 8. So we will start with section 8, which provides a list of exemptions. So the list goes like this. Section 8.1 says there is no obligation to provide any citizen the following categories of information. So all these are qualified exemptions, as I already mentioned. So we'll start with 8.1a. 8.1a contains more than one exemption. There are at least four categories of exemptions here. It says where the disclosure which would prejudicially affect first sovereignty and integrity of India. This is the first category, and there is another category like security, strategic, scientific, or economic interest of the state, and third category affecting relations with foreign state, and finally fourth category which may lead to incitement of an offense, which you can find under Article 19.2 of the Constitution of India. So there are, we can say broadly, four categories of exemption under Section 8.1a. And 8.1b deals with the again information which disclosure may constitute contempt of court. This again you can locate under Article 19.2 of the Constitution, or sometimes courts themselves expressly forbid the publication of information. So in case of express orders by uh, courts, then that need not be disclosed. C again deals with the breach of privilege of parliament or state legislature. And D is a somewhat frequently used exemption compared to other exemptions, which deals with the commercial confidence, trade secrets, and intellectual property. There is one more exemption which you can find here, which disclosure if it would harm the competitive position of a third party, then that can be withheld. And 8.1e is another interesting exemption, information available in a fiduciary relationship. So fiduciary is a Latin word that means trust, relation based on trust. What are those examples? There can be some examples like a doctor-patient relationship, a lawyer-client relationship, banker-customer relationship. So all these relations ships fall under the ambit of fiduciary relationship. For example, legal advice tendered by an advocate can be withheld under Section 81G, may be withheld under Section 81G. And 81F deals with the information received in confidence from foreign government, and GH mostly related to law enforcement agencies. G says if it would endanger the life or physical safety of any person, then that information can be denied. Or if it identifies any source of information or assistance given in confidence for law enforcement, then that can be withheld. And H is directly related to law enforcement. If the police officer feels that an investigation is going on and a disclosure impedes the process of investigation, then the police officer can withhold information. But the word used is would. So, what does it mean? It means the PIO should have the opinion. If the PIO does not think, does not assume any uh, impeding, then the PIO can disclose information. Only when PIO thinks it impedes the process of investigation, then that information can be withheld. If the PIO doesn't think so, if the PIO doesn't think that it would impede, then the PIO can disclose that information. Similarly, it applies to prosecution and apprehension of offenders. I relates to cabinet papers here again, but cabinet papers, including records of deliberations of ministers and other officers, can be withheld. But there is a proviso which says once the decision is taken, then the reasons and the material can be disclosed. Should be, it says, shall be made public. So this is one kind of proactive disclosure here. Which you can find under the exemptions list, where the Act says once a decision is taken, the material on which the basis of which a decision is taken should be made public. So the word used is here is shall. So it can be treated as a mechanism, proactive disclosure mechanism, as far as the cabinet papers are concerned. And of course, 81J is the mostly frequently used exemption. Particularly, we have it has become more relevant now after the judgment made by Supreme Court under Justice K. S. Puttaswamy versus Union of India in 2017, where Supreme Court held it's a fundamental right. So 81J says there are two categories again. Information that is personal information, which has no relationship to any public activity or interest, or which would cause unwarranted invasion of privacy of the individual. So if the PO thinks the information meets these conditions, then information may be withheld. But there is a lot of discussion about definition of personal information because the RT Act itself doesn't provide the definition of personal information or privacy. Then how do you apply these exemptions? So that is a bit difficult. But now we have another bill after the Justice Puttaswamy judgment. Uh, a bill was introduced in Parliament, Lok Sabha. Now it is under consideration of the Parliament, where the definition of personal data is available. So the bill also seeks to amend the present RT Act. We are not sure whether the amendment will take place or not, but the amendment is with regard to this phrase, personal information. So the bill proposes to amend this phrase as personal data instead of personal information. So there is not much difference, but personal data is defined under the Personal Data Protection Bill, now under consideration of the Parliament. So we'll have a look at the exemptions uh, after we complete the discussions on exemption. So finally, Section 81J has a powerful proviso which says that information which cannot be denied to the Parliament or state legislature shall not be denied to any person. So what is that information which can be denied to Parliament members? So if you refer to relevant rules, parliamentary rules, there are certain restrictions even on Parliament members seeking information. Even personal information related to any officer cannot be sought under the uh, uh, in the during the question hour by the members of parliament. So there are certain restrictions. So same restrictions can be applicable here. Anyway, it's a wonderful empowering proviso where it actually gives the power, what we can say, strength for a common person, common citizen to seek information from the public authorities on par with the members of parliament. So finally, Section 8.2 is the most important provision where public interest is mentioned. You can find the reference to public interest in some other exemptions provisions under Section 8.1a, but this is the most important one, where it says, just having discussed all the exemptions, now the Section 8.2 says, so just notwithstanding all the exemptions provisions listed out under Section 8.1, it says, just forget all this. Now you do one test. What is that? If the public interest in disclosure outweighs the harm to above protected interest. If you think the public interest is in disclosure, there is larger public interest in disclosure, and it outweighs the above exemptions. So harm to the protected interest means the above exemptions listed out, the various harms listed out under the various exemptions under 8.1. If you think there is larger public interest, you can still disclose that information. So this is somewhat a revolutionary provision according to Supreme Court. Supreme Court in Yashwant Sinha versus CBI commented that Section 8.2 is a priceless right. It's a revolutionary legal revolution because it takes a U-turn and gives that decision-making power to the public information officer to disclose information which can be withheld under 8.1, even under exemptions, because in case of public interest, larger public interest. So having said, having discussed about the public interest, now we need to discuss what is the meaning of public interest. What are the factors that can favor disclosure? So factors in favor of non-disclosure you can find under 8.1 like privacy and integrity and so on, fiduciary relationship. But what are the public interest factors in disclosure? The Act doesn't say anything about it. So there are some countries where public interest test is prescribed, but no other country except Australia tried to define or explain this concept. Even in Britain, during the discussion on Freedom of Information Act, some of the MPs raised this question with regard to definition of public interest, but at that point of time, it was felt that it cannot be defined, could not be defined because it depends on the case to it depends on the facts and timing of the case. So decision has to be taken on a case by case basis. But Australia tried to explain this concept in their Right to Information Act, but depending on the international experience, we can list out 3 to 4 factors which need to be considered. First is transparency in public funds spending. So whatever you spend public money, there should be transparency, and transparency in decision making and public administration. So people, because democracy, people are masters, citizens are masters, they should be informed about the decision making, how government is making decisions and all those things. And there are other factors like public health. During the COVID, we have seen that how secrecy actually uh, increase the threat of pandemic. Now even doctors in China are demanding for the right information because initially they were suppressed and it took 2 months, almost 2 months to disclose that information to the outside world. Meanwhile, it spread to other countries and it came out as a big threat as a pandemic to the world. So now even doctors are arguing in favor of right to information because right to information includes right to seek and impart information. So unless doctors have that right to impart, share information, it is very difficult to stop future pandemics. So there is another factor, public health apart from public health, environment. So during the Bhopal uh, disaster, many argued that transparency could have saved that surrounding people from that threat because After Bhopal incident in 80s, most of the European countries and even America enacted strong environmental right to know legislations. Unfortunately, India took some time to enact a Act and Right to Information Act. So what is the difference between right to information and environmental right to information legislations? So under environmental right to information legislations, even exemptions are not very strong enough. People can make oral request and seek information even from private factories with regard to emissions, any poisonous gas emissions, and so on. What are the security measures and so on. So with this, these are the important factors where we have to take into consideration while doing public interest test. With this, we would like to conclude this module on exemptions. Thank you.